Okay, welcome. My name is Dave Edwards, and I'm glad to see some familiar faces as well as some new faces. This talk is about protecting some of the things that are most valuable to us, our family and our homes. And I'm not going to address use of guns or non-use of guns. That's up to the individual, for sure. But what I will talk about are some ways that you can possibly protect your doors and your windows, and that may give you time to respond appropriately afterwards, regardless of how you choose to respond. Whether that's going into a safe room with your family, or leaving through another exit, or choosing to defend your family and your home. So, tell you a story. About 25 years ago, I was in Rochester, New York, and I was living in a pretty nice neighborhood, in a fairly nice home, and one day I got a call at work, and somebody from the family called and said, "Something strange is going on with the door. The door is open and it's broken." And I said, "Please leave the premises immediately and call the police." And they said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, because somebody probably broke in and they may still be there." So it turned out that the home was burglarized. Somebody had kicked in the door and had taken different things from the home. And when we talked with the police, they had an inspector come out. "Welcome to come on in." "Thank you. Thanks for coming." See, do we need to open anything up for you?
I'm okay.
Okay, very good. So anyway, the police inspector came out and noted what was going on, and we said, are you going to dust for fingerprints? And they said, "No, we usually can't find fingerprints. There are thousands of fingerprints in a home. You know, it's hard to know what to dust for." And I said, "Well, there's one thing that I noticed. We had a plastic change cup that had been filled with change, and in one bedroom where this was, the pillowcase was gone, and the change cup was emptied, and it was on the floor." And so we figured that the guy had probably taken the change, dumped it in the pillowcase, put the pillowcase under his jacket, and left. That's what we were figuring, but we asked them if they'd be willing to dust the change cup. They did, and the change cup had a good fingerprint. And they said, "This ties in with somebody who we suspected may be burglarizing the area." And a short time later, we got a call from the police department saying a pawn shop had this guy come in and try to pawn some of the items that he had stolen from our house. And the fingerprint matched his. And this person was tried and found guilty and sentenced to prison. It's just kind of a sad thing. He was a heroin addict, and he had just previously burglarized his mother's home before he burglarized our home, and a bunch of other homes in the neighborhood. But burglary is something that is a concern. There are other things that are concerns. Home invasion implies that somebody comes into your home, they're not wanted, and they come in when you are present. Okay, so a home invasion could be a burglary could be a home invasion, but they're not necessarily the same thing. Robbery occurs when somebody uses force or expresses an intention to use force in order to get what they want, and there are these other concerns as well. So the question is, how do you keep your family safe? Well, it turns out that many property crimes, about 66% of them, are never reported to the police. People either know the person who was the perpetrator, or they don't want to get involved, or they figure their insurance will take care of it, and whatever the reason, they don't report them. Of burglaries reported, only about 14.1% are clear. Just like the police officer told me, it's hard to get fingerprints, it's hard to establish evidence that somebody burglarized a place. And so if you take 14.1% of 32.5%, it means only about 5% of burglaries are solved. So it's difficult for police to solve these. They do a good job with lots of different things, but that's a challenge. Now, along with all the burglaries each year, there are 1.65 million home invasions per year in the United States, and that's about 66% of the 25 million burglaries that occur per year. And then homicide also has gone up over time. So there are some concerns about keeping our family safe. Those of you who are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints may be familiar with some of these statements, but in the Family of Proclamation to the World, some of our church leaders have said fathers are responsible to provide protection for their families. And then the prophet Joseph Smith said it's the duty of all human beings to protect their own lives and that of their families whenever the need calls for it, and no power on earth has the right to forbid this. And then finally, from Doctrine and Covenants, section 134, verse 11, we believe that all men are justified in defending themselves, their friends, and property from the unlawful assaults and encroachments of all persons in times of exigency, where immediate appeal cannot be made to the laws and relief afforded. So if you can't get the police there in time to protect your family, then guess whose job it is? It's our job, right? To protect our family. That could be by keeping everybody secluded in a safer room, or leaving the premises through another exit, or picking up a shotgun, whatever feels right and it seems right to you as you seek inspiration on this. So how do burglars access a home? We're not talking just about burglars, but burglars, of course, are the most common people who access our homes when they're not wanted. And the entry through the first floor door or window occurs about 80% of the time. That's the most common approach. And then entry through a door or window is closer to 90 to 95% of the time if you include second floor doors and second floor windows. And then if you include basement doors and windows, it's close to 100% of the time. They're coming through a door or through a window. So that's the focus of this. How do you get your doors and windows enhanced so as to minimize the potential for burglary? So first thing to do is lock your doors. And that seems like a common sense thing, but 7% of Americans who are surveyed don't lock their doors when they go out. They think, I'm just going out to the store and I'll be back, and they leave their doors unlocked. And then the FBI reports that 55% of burglaries involve forcible entry, breaking down a door, breaking a window, whatever, but 37.8% were unlawful entries. And what that means is that nothing was done to damage the door or the window. They simply opened up the door and walked in. Or they pushed the window open and climbed through. That's an unlawful entry. And then 6.5% were attempted forcible entry. So the first thing we want to talk about is securing your doors. I like what the Delaware State Police quote says, secure your doors, protect what's yours. So first thing we need to understand to protect our doors is how they're framed. So this is a depiction of a standard door. So the door fits in this blue area, and then adjacent to the door is what's called the jack stud. This only goes up to the header. Excuse me. And then the king stud goes all the way to what's called the double top plate. So the key thing to remember is that there are two studs on either side of the door. Now, when you look at a door, it's in casing. When you buy a door that's already in casing from Home Depot, that's about 3/4 of an inch thick. And generally, when contractors put in a lock, they only use 3/4 inch screws. They're long enough to go through the casing, but they're not long enough to go through the studs. So the most important thing you can do, and it's very inexpensive to do initially, to protect your doors is to take out these small screws and put screws in their place that'll go into the studs, and we'll talk about how to do that. So this is a picture of somebody's door that they've taken off all the trim and everything else, the gypsum board. So you can actually see the king stud, which goes all the way up close to the ceiling. And then you've got your jack stud next to it. And then there's often a gap on one side of the door and another. This one's filled with foam, which isn't very strong, as you can imagine. And then there's this 3/4 inch casing, which is attached to the door and to the hinges. Well, there's not a lot of strength. This is often just tied into the stud with a couple nails. And that's not very strong. A 16-year-old can kick in an average door. It's not what you want to protect your family. So when you install hardware, any place on the door jambs, either a doorknob or a deadbolt or something else, you want to make sure that your nails are long enough to go into your studs. Talk about that in just a minute. Okay, so most door screws installed are only 3/4 of an inch long. I went to a family member's apartment recently, and she was talking about some civil disturbance that was occurring across from her in another apartment. And so I checked the screws on her deadbolt just to see how sturdy they were, and they looked like 1/2 inch, but they were probably 3/4 of an inch long. And that's as big as they were. And there were only 2 of them on the deadbolt. And then the wood was, on either side of the deadbolt, was so thin, and some of it was split, and it almost felt like paper when I just pressed it against it. So it wasn't very strong. So I had to come up with a different approach to work for her. But what you can do is you can have either yourself, if you're handy, or a carpenter or a locksmith come in and replace these screws that are only this long with screws that are much longer. So here's an example of the kind of screw that you might want. This is a construction screw. You want good steel. This screw is 3.5 inches long. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, so it looks just like this one, but yeah, so I thought it might be nice just to see one for scale, but looks just like that one. So anyway, I'm hard of hearing, that's why I couldn't hear what you were saying, even with these hearing aids. But thank goodness I can hear a little bit still. So anyway, usually you want a number 9 or number 10 screw. Number 10 is a little bit thicker, but sometimes it doesn't quite fit in your hardware that you want to put on the door, so you might need to get with a number 9. And then you want at least 3 1/4, that way you can get into the second stud at a good distance. 3.5 inches is preferable. Star heads are much easier to get the torque that you need to get it in through the studs than just a flat slot or a Phillips head. And when you drive in one of these screws, you don't want to split your door frame, right? So the best thing to do is to drill a pilot hole that's slightly narrower than the shank of this screw. So don't worry about the threads, but the rest of the screw, you want your drill bit to be a little bit thinner in diameter than the screw diameter. And pre-drill your holes. So you already have some existing holes, right, for your strike plate for your deadbolt. You have 2 screws in there. They're 3/4 of an inch long. You just unscrew those, and then you go in and drill them deeper. You need something, a sufficiently long drill bit to at least get most of this 3.5 inches of a screw in there without splitting things. That will definitely help. And some people actually use soap. They put soap around the threads just to lubricate the screw as it goes into the wood, so there's less of a chance of it binding. But these long screws actually go into the joining studs. There are several places where you could do this. You could do this on the strike plate for the deadbolt, the strike plate for the the knob, the door knob, and then you can also do it on all of your hinges. You don't need to do the hinges that are going into the door necessarily. You may need to replace a couple of those, but all the hinges that are going into the casing on the side of the door, you want to take all of those out, preferably, replace them all with these longer screws. Now, the only exception would be if you have glass next to your door, if it's a front door, you want to make sure that your glass is not any closer than 3.5 inches to the place where you're putting the new screws in, because you don't want to break the glass. Okay. And so you can replace every screw driven into the jambs of your doors at home for a cost of approximately $12. So I just checked Home Depot. The current price for number 9 screws, 3.5 inches long, is like $11 and some odd cents. Excuse me. And that's for 89 screws. And so that should be sufficient if you have like 3 doors to your house, 3 exterior doors, to replace all the strike plate screws, all the deadbolt screws. You may need to replace with shorter ones. You'll have to look at your deadbolt to see how it's set up. But again, you can, if you're not handy or if you don't have experience, you can get a locksmith to do this or a good carpenter with experience. So with these longer screws driven solidly into the joining studs, it becomes extremely difficult for a burglar or home invader to break out a portion of the door frame. Generally what happens, if somebody kicks the door with a good kick, you know, some guys, especially young guys, you know, can get up high enough with their kicks and just kick the door, kick it in. Usually it takes 1 or 2, maybe 3 kicks to kick in an average door. And then you can also use donkey kicks where they kick like that. And if you go to YouTube, you can see videos of people kicking in doors, and it happens very readily. That's with those 3/4 inch screws. If you get screws going into the studs next to the casing around the door, those longer screws will make it much, much more difficult for somebody to actually penetrate through a door. And if you do this with the door hinges, it also makes it almost impossible for the door hinges to be ripped out. So if you look at doors that have been kicked open, generally what happens is even if you have a deadbolt, the deadbolt, if it's only secured with small screws and the strike plate for it is secured with small screws, generally some part of the door frame or the door itself breaks open. So that's an issue that needs to be addressed. If you get the screws, if that's all you do, that's a real big plus. The second thing I would recommend is you check your deadbolts and make sure you have good quality deadbolts that are difficult to break into and damage. I got some Schlage deadbolts that were recommended. They have different grades. There's grade 3, grade 2, and grade 1. You want grade 1 ideally, but they're expensive. So you might want to settle for something else. Comment? Sorry? Okay. So the deadbolts that you get should have a bolt that's at least 1 inch long. So you want it to go securely into the receptacle, the opening that's formed in the casing, and get it all the way into up against the first stud, or maybe into the first stud if it needs to be carved out a little bit. And then the type of deadbolt that you should get for your door that most experts recommend is called a single cylinder. So this is a single cylinder deadbolt. On the outside, it's keyed. On the inside, you've got a thumb turn. You don't want to have a double cylinder deadbolt that is keyed on both sides, typically. The reason for that is on the inside, if somebody loses the key and there's a fire, then how do people get out? So that's the primary reason for that. So anyway, single cylinder, bolt 1 inch long at least. Here's an example of the thumb, what do you call it? The thumb turn, whatever. Yeah. And then the key part's on the other side. This is the deadbolt cylinder extended. Again, it's just got 2 holes, so there are 2 screws. You want to make sure your screws are sufficiently long that they go in as far as possible without interrupting the activity of the deadbolt itself. So when you take your old deadbolt out, if you're going to do it yourself, you need to look at it and make sure that your screw length is appropriate. So you might need to use 2.5 inch long screws instead of 3.5 inch screws, for example. But you want something that's good and strong. And then for the strike plate, which is on the other side, the bolt fits into the strike plate, that's where you definitely want your 3.5 inch long screws or 3.25 inch screws. Now if you don't have a deadbolt installed on a door, like one of your back doors or a door to your garage, then you want to if you're doing it yourself, get a deadbolt doorknob installation kit. You can get them from Home Depot. And so it comes with a circular saw blade that will cut out the exact size hole. They tell you how, they've got a little frame that helps you get the right distance away from the edge of the door so you can put the deadbolt in. And that's a nice thing to be able to do. It's really important to have good deadbolts on all of your exterior doors. And then the spacing, the vertical spacing, you want to make sure that your spacing matches the spacing of the holes in the jamb. Okay, so if you have a deadbolt that comes out like this, you don't want to install your deadbolt below where the space for it to go is, if that makes sense. So just make sure everything aligns vertically. And again, if this is not something that you'd feel comfortable doing yourself, you may have a good friend, you may have know a good carpenter or a locksmith who could do this for you. This is something that is interesting. This is a door that somebody had kicked, trying to break in. They did not succeed. But what happened is, see how the door is split along here? They literally split the door open when they tried to kick it. But they have a guard around the deadbolt. You need a guard around your deadbolt of some kind or another. That's one kind that you can buy. That prevents the door from splitting, and it prevents the deadbolt from literally staying in place while the door is moving inwards. Okay? So it helps hold it all together. And that will allow this to remain functional even if somebody tries to kick it in. Now, there's some things you can do for strike plates. This is the cheap version. So I've got this just because I set it up on the stones out in the backyard like this. But in reality, if I'm the jamb and you're the door, okay, you're going to have it oriented like this. And so the door is going to open this way and close this way. And then this part right here and right here goes into the hole that's already existing for the deadbolt or for the door. And then instead of two screw holes, like on the strike plate we saw earlier, actually it was the deadbolt attachment plate, but the strike plate's just the same. There are only two screw holes. This one has 9. So if you use 3.5-inch long screws that are going not just into the casing around the door, that 3/4-inch thick wood, not just into the gap that has nothing in it, you know, if you have a gap on that side of the door, but all the way into the first 2x4 stud, or the second 2x4 stud preferably. If you have those screws going into there, how much strength is it going to take to push the deadbolt through this and through the door? It's generally going to hold, and I'll talk about some instances where that's demonstrated really well. So you have 9 long screws, you've got good quality metal, and so that's one thing that you can use. This is fairly cheap. This costs about $10. So this is another upgrade you could do to your doors that won't break the bank. Okay, an easier way, or a better way in some ways, is to buy a kit upgrade. So you can get these kits through a couple different people who sell them, companies that sell them. One is called Door Armor, another one is called Defender Security, which I think you can get possibly at Home Depot, used to be able to. And the ideal thing is to have a long strike plate that's about 40 inches long, okay? So that strike plate that I just showed you is about 10 or 11 inches long. If you have one 40 inches long, what it does is it allows you to use the long screws for your strike plate, and you distribute the load over 40 inches instead of just over a few inches, like on a typical strike plate or a 10-inch strike plate like that. I mean, 10 inches is a lot better than 3 inches, especially with 9 screws. But if you have something that's really long and strong, and it's really nice, it's actually quite presentable. So either if you do this yourself, or if you have a carpenter or somebody do it for you, you put the long strike plate on the door frame adjacent to your locks on your door, and then you have deadbolt protection they have something called door shields that you put on either side of the deadbolt and the knob, the doorknob, and that keeps the wood from splitting if there's force applied. And then it comes with long screws that are 3.5 inches long in the right diameter that match all of the other hardware. You can get some different colors, you can get different qualities, you can get different styles. You know, people have different doors. You have your standard entry door for your front door, but some people have double doors. Some people have glass windows on the sides of their doors that require a slightly different setup. So you can get different styles from Door Armor. They're the only company I know of that does it, and they do a great job with what they do. Defender Security offers long strike plates, but that's something that's fairly cheap and fairly easy to get. If you look at Door Armor videos, they show people using, some of these were done by third parties like police departments or whatever, but they show people trying to kick open their doors once these are installed. They do not succeed. They show them with battering rams, police departments or fire departments, big heavy objects with handles, often with 2 men, and they're literally trying to ram the door through, and they do not succeed with this door armor on. The door armor costs, you can get on sale usually for about $90 for one door, so it's a little more pricey than some of the other things we talked about. But I've put it on my front door, and I really like it. And I'm not trying to push door armor. I'm just not aware of anybody else who does the same type of thing. I think there are some knockoff companies that kind of do some of this. So to look around, there might be some options. And again, you may want a good carpenter to do this for you, or if you're handy, you might want to do it yourself. This is an example of the door armor, the way it comes in the box. This is the long jam strike plate that goes alongside the door opposite the part that opens. This is a hinge plate. This helps protect the hinges. And there are 2 hinge plates that came in this kit. And then these are the protection for the doorknob and for the deadbolt. They're not as big as the one we saw in the picture, but they do have a part that folds around the door, kind of helps hold it together a little better. And so this is what comes in one of these kits. And again, different styles for different types of doors. This is, they're advertising for it. This is where the jam shield goes over here. The Pro Door shields, which protect the doorknob and the deadbolt, go right there on the edge of the door. And then it comes with 2 hinge shields. They say it's better to do the lower 2 rather than the upper 2. But you could do it whatever works. One thing you do have to make sure is that there's enough space on either side of your door for this hardware to fit. They say if you can fit a 1/4 in, then that would be adequate to put this hardware in. If there's not, you could still do it, but you have to shave part of the jam back a little bit before you can install this longer jam shield. So that takes a little bit of work. Okay. In addition to the protection on the side that keeps people from kicking it in, they have floor locks. And these come in different sizes. That's the old cane lock. You've probably seen those before. This is something that is sold to schools, and they use this by itself to keep intruders out if there's an active intruder, active shooter. They just basically put this pin in and it goes into a hole that's drilled into the floor, and that alone is what they use to keep intruders out. This is called the night lock, and again I've seen videos where with just the night lock by itself people are trying to bust down a door and they'll kick it and kick it and kick it and kick it, and eventually they wear out. They can't move it in. So this part up here just slides in and out pretty easily. So that's something that provides an added element of security for your doors. Can provide it. And then one more thing, if you really want to keep going with this, is you can have an exterior door, like a screen door, and you can make it, instead of nylon mesh to keep the mosquitoes out, and maybe some glass that could easily be broken if somebody threw a rock at it, you can replace some of these materials with either high-strength glass, polycarbonate. Polycarbonate is incredibly strong. It's 250 times stronger than glass, is what they say. Or you can use stainless type 304 screen, 12 by 12 mesh. That means there are 12 wires going this way for every inch and 12 wires going this way for every inch. So this material is called stainless security screen. There are a couple of places in the United States where you could get it. There's only one that's readily accessible called Metro Screen Works, which is where I purchased this screen. And this stuff is really, really strong. You can't cut it with a knife. I mean, you could try, oops, did I just turn things off? Okay, I'll go back one. Okay, so anyway, this is incredibly strong material, and you can use this to protect windows, and you can use it to create screen. There are companies that sell security door screens like this, and some of them are good and some are not so good. So if you wanted to pay for one, they're going to be expensive. Just a regular window with this type of screen that are sold commercially. I was listening to a video the other day. They said the average price was about $1,000 per window. But you could buy this screen. I don't know exactly what it is per foot currently, but it'd be like, $50 or something like that for a window to get the screen. But you have to figure out how to install it. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Okay, just some protocols. Most experts say never open the door for the stranger. That goes contrary to what a lot of us feel here in Utah. It's a friendly place. We've grown up here. The family I married into left their doors open all the time, and family members would just walk in and out when they wanted to. They might do a quick knock, and then they walk in. So things have changed, Things are more challenging. Like I said, I came from Rochester, where our house had a door that was kicked in by someone on heroin out of his mind. Whoop. Did I go? Okay. All right, sorry about that. So peepholes, one-way view, preferably, 180-degree view, so you could see everything out on your porch. Allows you to see who's there. If you have an intercom system, like a Ring system, I don't have one right now. I'd like to get one. It would allow for easier communications instead of yelling through the door when somebody comes. If somebody comes saying they have a problem, they're saying they just had an accident, they need to call the police or something, do you let them in? You might if you felt inspired to do so, but generally it probably wouldn't be a good idea, especially if you don't know who they are. But you can't offer to call the police for them. If they're a bad guy, they'll say, "Oh, thank you." Do talk or make some noise. Some burglars, quite a few of them actually, prefer not to burglarize a home where somebody is present. And the reason for that is police aren't usually a problem for them because they're in and out usually in 8 minutes or so. The police aren't there. They don't have to worry about being shot while burglarizing. But homeowners sometimes shoot them. So for that reason, if you turn on some music, get your dog to bark, say something, let people know that you're present rather than trying to be quiet and hide is generally what they recommend. There are a lot of people that you never want to have come in your home. And then the final thing is chain lock connections. I used to have, in Rochester, we had a flip lock that would allow the door open so you could talk to somebody. But those often suffer from the same problems that regular doors do. The screws aren't long enough, the hardware's not strong enough, the connections aren't strong enough. So generally, I'd be wary of this type of lock, especially the chain lock, because it probably has very small screws. The hardware can probably break. I'm guessing most young, able-bodied men and probably a lot of women could just easily kick that door open and break that right through. So it's a convenience, but if you do decide to go that way, you may want to do some of these things. Make sure your door is super strong, solid wood or steel. The screws need to be long and strong enough, like we talked about before. And then the lock and the chain and the connections must be very resistant. Okay, this is something, it's kind of ugly, but it's a cheap but primitive way to bar a door. So you may have some basement doors or a door to your garage where you want to do this. These pieces of hardware you can get at Home Depot, for example. These go by different names. Home Depot used to call them some really strange things. I can't remember what they call them, but they've got one that's closed, a closed holder, and one that's open. And what you want to do, if you do decide to go with this, with a 2x4, it's very inexpensive. These cost probably about $8 a piece, these pieces of hardware, and then the board is very inexpensive. If you do want to do that, you generally put your closed holder on this side of the door that opens. And that way, if somebody sticks a knife blade or something, they can't flip it up and make it pop out like they could potentially over here. So that helps if they can get the door open even a little bit, it helps prevent that. And then once you get slid in, then this one just can go in like that. So on these, you use heavy bolts. If you get one with 2 holes on each side, it means each needs to go into a separate stud, each bolt. And that's, you need to know where your studs are to do that. This type goes into a single stud. It's a little bit easier to get the bolt in place. Okay, they've got some nicer ones now that you can get. These are actually 2 separate products sold on Amazon, but you've got a closed holder over here, an open holder here, and they're nicely coated with the black paint, and so it's nice to get some that are black rather than galvanized if you're going to put it someplace where people would be viewing it. And it doesn't really cost a whole lot more. Home Depot now has some like this, and this is a thin line version. Even though there are 2 holes, these are close enough together that they fit into a single stud on one side of the door, and this fits into a single stud on the other side of the door. And so this is a very inexpensive way. Some people use this on the interior of their sheds or the exterior. They rig up a lock system. Some people put them in their basements. And generally in Utah, we haven't had much of a need for this type of thing, right? At least where we live. But things are getting kind of strange in some parts of the country. In Seattle, where they're trying to defund the police and they've got a city council that is not supportive of the police a whole lot, the murder rate last year went up 30% in 1 year. And so things are getting kind of crazy in some parts of the world. If you do want to put something into a stud, and most of you know about this, use a stud finder, and you find out where each stud starts and stops, and then you need to drill pilot holes for these lag screws, because the ones you want to use are thick ones for these door bars, generally about 1/4 inch thick, and then again you want them to be quite long, 3.5 inches. So use your stud finder, move from the right to find the right edge of a stud, move from the left to find the left edge. If you have a jack stud and a king stud together, you're going to see them as one stud with your stud finder. But it'll be, instead of, a 2x4 isn't really 2 inches, it's 1.5 inches. So if you have 2 of them together, it's 3 inches. So when you find the stud going this way, and then you come from this side and you find the other one and they're 3 inches apart, you know you found your 2 studs. So if you have something you need to attach to 2 studs, just make sure your holes are lined up with your studs. Okay? So protecting windows. So first of all, you can use window pins. We'll talk about these in just a second. And that helps hold the windows either in a closed or a partly open but secure position for ventilation. You can apply window security film to keep the window glass from being broken through as easily or as readily and give you time to respond to a potential intruder. You can use polycarbonate in a frame behind your window glass, or you can use security screen in a frame behind your window glass. And then lastly, like if you had an earthquake and your windows were broken or whatever, you can just put up a 3/4 inch piece of plywood over your window. You can't see out of it, but it would at least keep the cold out. So these are window pins. You can get different designs. Just make sure they're really strong. They just go through, like in the old days, do any of you have windows with double hung casings where one casing moves up and relative to the other? So what you do is you just drill a hole through the casing on your side in the room, part way into the casing on the other side, and then you can just put a pin through that, and it keeps someone from outside being able to move the window and get in. So this is called window film. This is a roll of 8mm security window film, and this film can be cut and fit to the inside of each window, and it's got adhesive. You activate it by applying soapy water and then use a squeegee to squeeze out all the air bubbles and all the excess fluid. And when you're done, I can't tell that there's a film there, security film. This is 8mm, which is a good thickness because it's still workable, but it's quite thick. And it holds the glass together even when the glass is shattered. So if someone threw a rock at your window, the window would shatter, but the window film would hold it all together. You can get something called Dowsil 995. Everyone recommends exactly this and nothing else that I've seen. And you use that to apply between the edge of your window film and the casing of the window, so the solid part that's attached to the frame. You use a bead of that all around, and that way, even though the glass holds together, if you don't have that, the whole glass panel, if it was all busted up, could be pushed in. Okay, if someone was battering it with a sledgehammer or something. But if you put this Dowsil on, it holds all the glass and the film to the frame. So the cheap but good stuff that I like is called bidecorative film, BDF, 8mm. And then a more expensive but excellent option is 3M security film. That's what banks use and businesses use. They apply it on the outside as well as the inside, and it's still totally transparent, so that's nice. And then almost everyone, like I said, recommends this Dowsil 995. So this is a picture of a hammer coming from the other side of the window that has window film on it. So the glass does shatter, but it's all held intact. And it just makes it difficult for an intruder to get through that as long as the film is there. But they can get through it ultimately. A determined intruder can get through a lot, but the idea is, that's our 5-minute bell before we close. And but if you can discourage them, most burglars who are just taking advantage of an easy opportunity will move on. They won't keep trying to get through something that's providing a lot of resistance. And it always gives you time to respond. If you don't want to be woken up at 3 in the morning and have somebody immediately in your room with a weapon, you would prefer to have several minutes notice, I imagine. I would. Okay, and some more ways to protect windows. We talked about using window pins and security film. So here's a different way. This is what it looks like when you're done. And so what these windows have behind them, the windows have security film on them, and then on the inside there's a frame that's built that has both polycarbonate and this screen that we talked about before. And if you look over here, this is one of them. This is one that I haven't installed yet. Bishop Pope, would you be able to help me with this? I just want to make sure it doesn't fall on anybody. We'll just set it up like this. So there's not a lot of light on the other side, but generally when you have this inside and you're looking at the outside, it's quite clear. but it does reduce the amount of light a little bit. So this one has both things added. That's polycarbonate. You could hit that with a sledgehammer and it's not going to break. It's really tough stuff. It's 1/4 inch thick. And so there's a place where you could get this in Salt Lake area. And then on the other side, if we could just turn this a little bit here, I'll trade places with you. Thank you, Bishop. Okay, and so this is that screen I was talking about. So if anyone wants to try cutting this with a knife, you're welcome to, but you could use a tool on that for a long time before that's ever going to go. So you could just use the screen, you could just use the polycarbonate. The thing you want to do is figure out a way to install this so that an intruder doesn't have access to the fasteners. So I used screws on here, lots of screws, and that's to give this shear strength so that even if this is hit hard and deflects, it's not going to move. Now this is a frame that goes inside the window frame. So the actual window is out here, and then the window frame comes up against this. So somebody could potentially get a screwdriver or a blade in this way, or even a reciprocating saw, but these tend to be reset. So I drilled, or Susie drilled, openings that are a little bit bigger than the diameter of the head of the screw, just as a countersink, and then we did the pilot hole and put these in. So these actually get screwed in almost flush with the edge here. And then again, this goes flush up against the window frame. People can't access this if they can't get past the screen, which is on the outside. And then, of course, the window's on the outside of that. So we can go ahead and set this down. Yes, okay. Thank you. So this just sits on our windowsill. We've got, in a basement, we've got windowsills that are about that thick. And so one thing you want to be able to do is if there was a fire, you'd want to be able to move this out of the way to get to the window. So what I do is I have the inside, and if this is the stud where my hand is, can everybody see? If that's where the stud is, I just have these long nails in 3 different places, and put a washer on that side. So if something happened, you just go, remove the screws, and you just push this out, and then you can access the window to escape if you need to. Hopefully that'll never happen. So that's what I have for windows and for doors, and there's a whole lot to security. I've got a pile of papers right here that you can take. There's some right here that you can take, and there's some on the chair back there that you can take. These have URLs to good information from police departments about general security. We could easily spend hours and hours talking about general security. But anyway, thank you for coming. I appreciate your presence and hope that you're all safe, you and your families. Thank you.
Are all your windows this at your home?
No. But ground floor windows need to be protected. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So there are different ways to protect them. This is just one way.
Okay.
Yeah. These are quite heavy, the way I built them with the 2x4s. So like, we used to have a kitchen window that was exposed to the stairwell. We no longer have the stairwell, but somebody could literally just walk up the stairwell and get into the kitchen. So what we did there is we took just some polycarbonate and we put it in a metal frame that could be secured to the inside of the windowsill and the window frame, if necessary. So that's a lot lighter. Hi.
You got halfway through the slides. I'm curious what all the other ones were.
Oh, well, the other ones went into the description that I did here primarily. And there was one other thing, well, there are actually lots of things I couldn't cover just because of the time. This is a hanger bolt.